This man, on September 2nd, may it please the court, this man, on September 2nd, 2016, murdered Laura Landavazo. He shot Makayla in the chest. Both of them were 13 years old. You can determine from that evidence that this man really gets his ticket punched, shooting innocent 13-year-old girls. You can't tell, according to the experts, by the way he looks. He has this flat effect. Flat effect is just another way of saying no conscience. Doesn't show any remorse. He hadn't spoken of any remorse to the experts. Hadn't shown any remorse to the experts. When some of you had tears and witnesses were crying in this courtroom, no remorse over here. No conscience over there. Folks, it's my duty at this time to just briefly go over the evidence brought to you on behalf of the state of Texas that proves this defendant committed these crimes. And I bet that proof somewhat shows that he knew what he was doing and he knew it was wrong. Now, our first witnesses, we brought you 5 witnesses who were children at the time of this event. And they were children. There were 12. 4 of them were 12. 1 of them was 13. And those are children, and I'll explain that to you. Most of them probably agree. But when they came in here, they told you what I call their unwanted memories. Oh, they wish they could forget it. They wish they didn't have to live it. But folks, they hit that stand and told you exactly what happened 2 years later. Like it only happened yesterday or eternities ago. They'll never forget. First, we brought you Garrett. Garrett was a 12-year-old on his way home from school, walking east on Tower Street. He's on the sidewalk. A utility truck passes him, and then he remembers a gold SUV came up. It was a Tahoe. His dad, a police officer, used to drive a Tahoe with the department. He recognized it. The Tahoe slowed down, made a turn, and he noticed it stopped there at the alley in back of Tower Street. And he looked over, and the window came down, and a gun stuck out. And then shots were fired. A shot was fired, and then more shots. And he saw Lauren, and Lauren fell. And he heard girls screaming. And he ran. He ran as fast as he could down the street to a neighbor's house, banged on the door, no one was there. Then he ran toward his house and saw his dad was home. His dad wasn't normally home at that time. He ran into the house, and what did he do? Hugged his dad. That's a 12-year-old. And remember, Maureen asked him about Lauren. Did you know Lauren Landavazo? Well, I sure did. I knew who she was. They weren't close, remember? And I think we all smiled, and sometimes in a case like this, it's good if you can smile. Remember, 6th grade boy and an 8th grade girl, they would know each other. Yeah. But what does that tell you that's a little deeper? It tells you they're children. That 2 years makes a whole lot of difference when you're that age, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Our age, except for you, some of you younger women, 2 years doesn't make that big a difference. 40 years doesn't make that big a difference. But back then, friends and who you run with, 2 years, a world of difference. Those are children. After Garrett testified, you heard from Elijah, and Elijah said he was walking like he did every day after school with Hope and Crystal and Ashton. They were walking toward Hope's house. He'd go that far, and then he'd go into his place. He lived a block away from there. And then he sees a gold SUV at the end of the alley. Lauren is closest to the end of the alley. Makayla's a little bit behind her. The SUV stops, and they start, he hears a popping sound. Didn't see a gun or anything. But Makayla turned and started running. Kyra had already taken off before the popping sound. He didn't know what was going on, but it scared him, and he ran into Hope's backyard. And then the other kids came in there that he was walking with, and they couldn't get in. The patio door was locked. They're not wanting to knock on that door and draw attention. Who is this guy? What was going on? Shooting? Is he going to go down the alley? They're trapped. What do? He's scared. But then the shooting stopped, and eventually he goes out into the alley. And he sees Lauren. She's down, and she's not moving. He stays away from her. But he sees Makayla, and she's been shot and injured. The door opens. They go in the house. He calls his dad, and his dad comes down to get him to take him one block. He was so scared. And when his dad shows up, he hugs him. They came down here and told you their stories and cried. And then you heard from Hope. Remember Hope? They were going toward her house. And Hope says as they approached the house, she saw a gold-colored SUV stop. And a gun came out the window. And she thought it's a BB gun or a paintball gun. And she thought someone was playing a game. And then they started firing. And when they started that, Makayla turned and ran. And Lauren, she saw her fall. She ran into the backyard and couldn't get in her house. Eventually, she was able to go back into the alley. She ventured out there. Makayla's been shot. Makayla was bleeding. She stayed away from Lauren. Lauren wasn't moving. She said she went through therapy for a year and a half. Finished the therapy. She'll be all right, won't she? I wouldn't tell her. None of us should. She'll never be all right. Therapy's not going to help. You heard from Crystal, didn't you, after that? Crystal was with them. She sees an SUV stop, sees a gun, and hears noises pop, pop, pop like a firecracker. Makayla runs. Lauren falls. She goes in the backyard. They can't get in. And then one of the bravest things I think I've ever heard anybody do. She knows they've got to get in. She's thinking someone may come. So what does she do? She runs back into the alley where the shooting was. She had seen the vehicle leave. She doesn't know where it is, but she runs down that alley past a fallen Lauren. Never looked at her, is what she said. Ran to the next street, over to Hope's house, banged on the door, got the door open, and then got the patio door unlocked so the other kids could come in and find safety. Her grandmother always picked her up at Hope's house, and she picked her up then. Does she have any lasting effects? Oh, yeah. She said different things trigger those memories, but especially when she's outside and the car drives by slowly. The car drives by slowly. She has to stop, sit down, and breathe. 4 people, 4 12-year-old children. And folks, they are victims. They are victims of this man. Oh, they don't have physical scars. They got the mental scars. And they'll stay with them. After they testified, we brought you Makayla Smith. Makayla is something special, I think. She's the victim of aggravated assault. Now, I want you to know that aggravated is just another way of saying cold-blooded. Okay? Cold-blooded assault. State doesn't have to prove to you why this man would go out there and shoot. We don't have to prove it. But I'll tell you why he shot Makayla. It's clear from the evidence, and everybody except his expert witness understood it. What did he say in his statement? Numerous times. What was the first time? She always walked by herself. I've been thinking about maybe shooting her. But this day I looked and she was with two black girls. And I said, hell, we ain't having that. So I grabbed my gun and took out. Took out after her. Why? Because she's with two black girls. He's a racist. If Mommy would give him the money, he'd have the tattoos. So he takes that gun, goes down. What does Makayla say? I've been friends with Lauren since the 3rd grade. We were good friends. We joked with each other, spent time together. What was Lauren like? Oh, she was kind. She was open-minded. She was positive. Great description of a 13-year-old girl, given from a great 13-year-old girl. That's how old Makayla was. She saw Lauren across the street after school and called her name. Lauren turns, sees Makayla, sees Kyra, waits for them to come over, and they start walking down the north entrance to Fountain Gate Apartments toward what turns into the alley on Tower. Not realizing as they're walking along, this man is staring at them, watching them, having something triggered. I don't know that he's running down to his truck when he sees them to get in it, or to his SUV. And he's going to drive down to the end of the block, meet them. Makayla says she waited. Lauren waited for them. They walked together, laughing, just talking to each other. Reminiscent of the fact school had just started and they didn't have any classes together, and that made them both sad. And then Makayla said she kind of fell behind Lauren. She and Kyra fell behind her because Lauren was going to go down to Trinidad and then go see her boyfriend who was in the high school that was ways away, and he was going to meet her there. They were teasing her about that. And then Makayla sees this man pull up in a vehicle, and the window come down, and he is white, and he has shaggy hair. He's about 17 years old, and he has a big nose, and he made eye contact with her. And then he turned around and came out with a gun, pointed it at her, pulled the trigger. She was shot. Now that's different. That's different from his version. She wouldn't leave her friend, so I put a couple of bullets in her. Remember, that's what he told the police. But you know from professional tests, you know from other things he said, you know he will lie. And you know in this situation, he did lie because Makayla knows where that first shot went. The first shot went into her chest. She turned to run, and then she heard numerous shots, and she was concerned. None of them hit her that she knew of. And when the shooting stopped, she turns. She's in pain. She can't breathe. But she's worried about one person, Lauren. And she sees Lauren on the ground. He had driven off. What did she do? And this is why I say you got to respect this 13-year-old girl. Right? You know, I put people on kind of levels as I meet them, and she goes at the top level. 13 years old. She is trying to put up a good front for people. She's concerned. Were you worried about dying? She was at. I was worried about Lauren, her friend. That's the kind of friend Makayla is. I'm glad the last person who called out Lauren was Makayla, because that name would have been so sweet coming from the girl. She was worried about her. She goes to the hospital, and her brother is there crying, and she feels sorry for her brother and tells him everything's going to be fine. She got a bullet in her, 3 holes, 1 bullet. Everything's going to be fine. And she said she stayed happy to make her family feel good. Now that's a special person. There are adults that can't do that. They'd be yelling, screaming, I'm in pain, I hurt. Not Makayla. Sweet girl. To shoot her like he did. He knew what he was doing. No delusion told him, kill that black girl. No delusion told him, shoot her. No evidence of that. She wasn't a part of the delusion. Because it wasn't a delusion, there was just a crime. Horrible crime. And she still has the bullet in her. And she says it hurts her occasionally when she's lying down or moves in a certain way. Someday it'll work its way to the surface and they'll hopefully cut it out and remove it. And she'll no longer have that bullet in her. She'll still have the memories. Okay? Those aren't going away because of him. After those children testified, what can we say about them? Okay? They had strength to come down here and tell you, and every one of them came in this courtroom and shed tears when they testified. It was emotional. But they finished testifying, and then we brought you some adults. We brought you John. Remember John, the war vet, the man who's got a disability, service-related, and he was in the backyard getting ready for a birthday party for his daughter. And he was a weapons engineer. Pardon me. He was a weapons engineer, and he can tell the caliber of a weapon by the sound, he said. And he told the police, when they came out there, he gave this report to them, I thought it was a 22, and this is before he sees any of the cells. And he says what? I think his testimony is real important because he's out there, and he hears a shot. And then a second or two later, he hears more shots, numerous shots, for 3 to 4 seconds. And then that's it, and he sees a vehicle drive off and another one behind it. And I'll talk about that, but first of all, let's look at what he heard. A shot to where? Makayla. And then a few seconds later, many shots to Lord. It's like Makayla told you. That's what he did, shot her first. John knew nothing about that, but his remembrance of the facts follows hers exactly. And it tells you what he was doing out there. It tells you what goes on in his mind. He's a racist. The last bit of evidence we introduced, cell phone report. You can look through this. It's got some text between him and his mama the day after he did his killing, maiming. Second page, here at the bottom. He liked to research black versus white girl fights. Black versus white girl fights. He's not a racist. Wow. John says he saw a tan or gold-colored SUV through the picket fence of his. The slats are right next to each other, but he could tell the color, and right behind it was a black pickup. And that caused so much confusion for a while. Other witnesses saw a black pickup out there. But he jumped over the fence, didn't go up to his gate. He needed to get to see what happened over there. He jumps over the fence, loses his flip-flops, runs across the street, and Lauren is there with what they refer to in the service as a death stare. Her eyes are open. She's not alive. And it bothered him. Bothers him still. He cried in the courtroom. He waited when the police came out. He did all he could do, is what we're told. You heard from Sarah after he testified. And what did Sarah say? She picked up her 9-year-old from a nearby grade school, comes down Tyler, going to make a turn on Trinidad. And as she's headed toward the stop sign at Trinidad Street, she sees a young, heavy-set boy running fast. And she could tell he wasn't just running. He was scared. She could tell from the look on his face, the way he was running. She looked around for bullies if they were chasing him. What's going on? She gets to that intersection, looks. She sees a girl laying at the entrance to the alley. So she stops to see what she can do. Can she help her somehow? And she gets out and she goes over to her. And she said her eyes were open and she had a wound at the top of her head. She said they were bright blue eyes. And she knew she's not going to answer me. But she asked her, "Are you okay?" And the answer was nothing. Because she had nothing. Her eyes were staring at nothing. And she said they were bright blue eyes. She'll always remember them. And she was clutching a binder, a school binder. And then she looked, and there's Makayla walking toward her. So she ran toward her, and then other people were coming who could provide some medical care for Makayla. So she stopped and called 911. You heard that call. She was excited. There was a lot of chaos out there, a lot of noise. Nobody knew what was going on. Just the two girls had been shot. And where's the guy who did it, and who's he shooting next? All kinds of people scrambling around. She made that call. And then she stayed until Lauren's parents arrived. And all she said about that, "I will remember that for as long as I live," when her parents came up. Next, you heard from Jamie. Well, Jamie did. She picked up her 4 daughters in grade school. Heavy burden. She's driving them home, gets to that intersection, sees a couple of cars stop, turns, sees a girl lying down at the front of the alley. She's a nurse. She thinks maybe I can help. She goes over to check. There's nothing she could do. She said, "I saw her pretty eyes." And then she checked, and Makayla was there, but she was already getting assistance. So she came back, looked at Lauren, and Lauren's fingers had bone coming out of them, and she knew Lauren had fallen so hard that she had shattered her fingers and the bones came through, and nobody's told her, and I'm not going to. Lauren didn't fall and get her fingers broken. One of those bullets went through it. You've seen the picture. That's what happened. So what does she do? People are coming around. She goes over, gets a blanket, brings it, retrieves the blanket, brings it over, and covers Lauren. And she stays that way until the medical personnel arrive. So you've heard from these 3 witnesses. All of them came in here, all of them cried. All of them shed their tears, told you what happened. All of them told you there's nothing I can do, nothing. Except I would submit to you that without knowing it, they gave the most precious gift you can give in a situation like that. Compassion. Would you agree? Compassion. They stood there, could do nothing, but wanted to do everything, wanted to do anything. And they told the police, they got their names down, and they came down here to tell you what happened. You had no notice of this, no knowledge of it. But they're compassionate, loving, caring people. Then after that, we came to the so-called professional witnesses, I guess. Dale Finnegan, police officer, you know, he was miles away when he got this call. I tailed it over there down that alley, turned on his camera, in-car video, and you saw the chaos he described out there. People milling around, not knowing what to do. When he first pulled up, cars driving by on Trinidad, a crime scene that needed to be secured and blocked off, and he did that. And he started locating witnesses, and getting their names and their information to contact them, and sending them over to talk to detectives. He did all this, and you saw that, and then you heard the end of his video. That's my daughter. Remember that? It was screamed out, and you heard it. And Dale says every time he thinks about that, it sends a chill through him. That's my daughter. Could she hug her daughter? No, it's a crime scene to keep her away. Maybe at the hospital? No, can't hug her daughter. The effect of this man's crime. Then you heard from Kelly Collins, crime scene technician. She went out, looked over the scene, marked evidence, photographed evidence, collected evidence. And you know, she collected a blanket. A blanket, I submit, that had been put over Lauren. And it was full of medical stuff, wrappings, gloves, things that had been used to treat Lauren when the medical people arrived. And you can look at that. It's in evidence. Please use gloves if you do. Please use gloves. But when we opened it to photograph it, to show you those photographs the next morning of what's still in there, the bullet fragment was recovered. Hadn't been noticed before. It had hair and tissue attached to it. She collected the binder, bullet hole through that binder. That's in evidence. You can look at it with gloves, please. It's dangerous stuff. What this man does leaves dangerous residue behind. Okay? She marked 15 .22 caliber cartridge casings, according to her General order. Collected up. Then we heard from Hillary Appelor, went to the hospital and took pictures of the clothing. It's in evidence. You can look at that. Makayla's real small right now. 2 years ago, I don't know how big she was. Sweet little girl. Lauren was a small child. You can look at their clothes and figure it out. And those are in evidence. And they're photographed so you can see what they were wearing. You can see the blood on them. It wasn't bloody when they went to school that morning. It wasn't bloody when they entered that alleyway. And then she took pictures of the two girls. You saw Makayla, 3 holes in her, 3 holes. 1 bullet through her breast, into her other breast, and then down into her, where it stays to this day. And you saw the pictures of Lauren. I don't need to discuss those with you. And from there, Lauren is carted off to the lab, to the crime scene, laid on a cold metal table. Autopsy protocol was begun, and I'm not going to go into that with you. You know what you heard, you know what they did. But what were the results? 15 bullet holes, entry holes. 15. You ever hear the phrase overkill? 15 bullet holes in an innocent girl. Makayla had one. She'd have had more if he had more ammunition. Can you imagine bragging to a doctor like that? If I had more, I would have killed her. That's what he told him. Well, he's already rehabilitated, isn't he? He will never be rehabilitated. Sometimes you just get angry about things, pardon me. But you know the results. She had 3 fatal ones, 3 shots that would have killed her no matter what. But you throw in another 12. And the 3 grazies, you saw photographs of them. They look like entry wounds. My goodness. And maybe they were grazies before they entered her body. Couldn't tell us. They recovered some shrapnel, bullet fragments. Sent them over to the firearms examiner there in the Dallas crime lab. And that's it. That happened on a Friday and on a Saturday. No one's caught. So you can imagine in Wichita Falls, what's happening? Can I send my children to school? Can they walk to school? Some mad person's out here. And I don't mean he's insane. When I say he's mad, when I say he's crazy, I'm talking about his conduct. I'm not talking about legal sanity, okay? Because what he did is crazy. But people are worried. What am I going to do Monday? Can I send my kids to school? Some of them have to walk to school and back. I'm worried about them. And the police are looking for him. What do you do to find him? And now this man who loves to paraphrase the Bible, couldn't quote it to anybody, he said, I love the Bible. I've got one for him. Proverbs 26 and 11. Just as a dog returns to his vomit, a fool returns to his folly. And we know on Sunday, September 4th, this dog returned to his vomit, drove right by that memorial that had sprung up for Lauren. That was his undoing. He'd got to go by and see it. The fool had to come back to his folly because Joanne is sitting there with her husband. You weren't there, you don't know how the town feels, but what's going on is what people are saying. And these people say, this little girl got shot and killed apparently by a stranger. There's no closure on that. Oh, there'll never be closure, okay? Not for her parents. You always say, well, there'll be some closure here. They'll find a new way to cope with it. Oh, there's never a new way to cope, only a new way to miss her. But these strangers, they say, if I can go out maybe and see the memorial, pardon me, maybe I'll feel better, or at least have an understanding of what's going on. They're sitting out there, other people are at the memorial, they're waiting. They don't want to disturb these people. Let them have their time. And here comes a gold SUV line. And it's being driven by a younger person, white, with shaggy hair. They say, what? Follow him, she tells her husband. And they do. And he goes to an apartment complex right down the street at the end of Tower Drive. And they see him park, get out, walk around to the other side. And the dog, who's going to return to his vomit, has something under his arm with a blanket covering it, but at the end is sticking out part of a rifle. And they say, what in the world? And call the police. So the police get alerted to it, and she wrote the license number down on the hand. You got a picture of that. Wanted to be sure they're talking about the right person. He comes out after just a few minutes, gets in the vehicle and drives off. So they're talking to 911, and 911 says, don't follow. You know, you don't tell civilians to go follow suspected murderers. Well, they're telling them, you stay put. We're sending an officer over there, and then they're told, an officer has just entered the parking lot. And we know an officer had just entered the parking lot, okay? But that officer wasn't looking for the people who had phoned it in. He's looking for independent. They stop him. They find what? The shell casing in the car when it's searched. They find the bag that he had put the gun in. They go to his apartment that they can connect. And there's a photograph taken out the window showing the alleyway where he could easily see those girls. And the shell casing is sent to the lab with the shell casings found at the scene, and they all match up. They're all fired by the same weapon that came out of the apartment where his parents lived. And then you heard the last bit of evidence, which was a jail call to mom and dad. I did it. And folks, that's it. That's evidence brought to you by the state. Let me ask you this. Think about Makayla, please. How sweet she is. How caring she is of other people. Think about Lawrence. Kind, open-minded, positive, and dead. And when you see innocence in the state of these two girls, defiled and destroyed like it has been, you know something is really, really wrong. And based on this evidence, when you conclude that what is wrong is drug abuse, 11 out of 10 times you'll be absolutely right because he's guilty.
Mr. Preston?
Thank you.
I think one thing that we know after the first argument and after the evidence that's been presented is that this was one of the most horrible events that anybody could witness. I hope you don't think for any moment that the horror of what occurred, that the death of a girl, that all of that is somehow should be dismissed, because it shouldn't be. None of that is in dispute. None of that is a question here today. What you have to do is a job, however. You're just beginning your job. Our job is just about done. Your job will begin. Mr. Bost told you that there's certain tools that you have to do your job. I'm going to go through those here shortly. Then I'm going to let Mr. Bost talk, and then Ms. Shelton will finish up. Let me tell you, first of all, as emotional and as horrible as this is, you have instructions from the court on how you're to do your job and how you're to make your decision. One of those things is in paragraph 8, top of the second page, where it says, do not let bias, prejudice, sympathy, resentment, or any such emotion play any part in your deliberations. There was horrible emotion out there that night, but what you must do is set that aside and judge the facts. You're the judge of the facts. The judge has provided you the law. You now must evaluate the facts, and each one of you are individual judges. Remember, I told you about an individual verdict. But I also told you about a tool that all of you have, and that's your collective wisdom. So as you go through and evaluate the evidence, please share with each other what the evidence shows to you and what it means to you. Take time to talk with each other. We're not dealing about whether or not this was a horrible event. We know that. We're not dealing about the facts that happened. We know what happened out there factually. We're dealing about a mental state, and you know that. And that's been presented to you. We spent most of our time talking about it. So the tools that you have are the court's charge, which tells you not to use emotion. Also, there are definitions in here. Now, sometimes jurors will send out notes and ask for definitions that are not provided to them. The judge has provided you all the law that you're going to get. There's not going to be other definitions, other things, so you need to use this, plus the common definitions that we all understand, the words in the English language. So this will help you out. Mental disease and defect is not defined. You will not get a definition of it. It is, there's no definition of what's wrong. You will not get a definition of that. If you, however, have questions about the evidence, you may send a note out, as the judge says in here, and you may ask to have testimony read back to you if you need to resolve conflicts. So you can do that. Otherwise, use your collective memory. That's a tool that you can use for making your determination. Other tools that you have are the records. There's a lot of records here. Records that Mr. Poole referenced here, photographs, this huge medical record, which occurred a year before, which states that Mr. Lott was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, is available to you. I don't expect you to review each page or go through each of this, but if there's some sort of a conflict or something in your mind that needs to be resolved, this is the evidence before you. And you can use that, just as you can use the physical evidence and everything else that you have before you. Take it back into the jury room with you, and if you need it to resolve facts, use it to resolve facts. You have three options on each one of the verdict forms: guilty, not guilty, or not guilty by reason of insanity. Really, there's only two: guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. That's the defense we put forward. We put the evidence out there. They've rebutted the evidence. That's the evidence before you. That's what you have to decide. The emotion, the horror, set that aside and make your determination on the facts, on what you heard, and on the reasonable inferences from the facts, or reasonable deduction from the facts. If there's something that you believe, fact deduced, then that can be the fact that you find. So discuss all of that. Each one of you has your own opinion on the facts, and you can share that with other people, and you try to persuade other people. Let me talk just about a couple of things, and then I will sit down. During the argument, there are four things that lawyers can argue. We can argue the evidence, which is here. We can argue reasonable deductions from the evidence. In other words, a deduction would be, for example, if Mr. Lott, 1 year before the event, had schizoaffective disorder, you can deduce that he had schizoaffective disorder on the day that it occurred. That's a reasonable deduction which you may make. State or the defense can make a plea for law enforcement, which is what I have done, to follow the judge's instructions, to reread them over, to consider them. And the last thing that we can argue in state is to answer whatever the opposing counsel said. We can respond to that, and they can respond to us. One thing, however, when Mr. Voss sits down, we do not have an opportunity to make any response to the state's final argument. They have the burden of proof overall in the case. We have the burden of proof on the insanity, but they have the burden of proof overall. And the final argument, they get that, and we can't respond to it. That doesn't mean there isn't a response. If there is something that you feel is important and it wasn't said, it doesn't mean it's not important just because we didn't say it. You remember Dr. Price said on the gun that there was dirt and grass on it, and that was not brushed off. In other words, that was evidence possibly that Mr. Lott did not know what he did was wrong because he didn't conceal that. He hadn't thought of that. Dr. Falls had thought of that. That's something that even between the two of them, they didn't realize. And there may be facts that each one of you can determine that fit into that type of category. Ladies and gentlemen, at the conclusion of all the arguments and the conclusion of your deliberations, we ask you on our side to find what the facts show. Mr. Lott is not guilty by reason of insanity. Thank you.
If I look a little nervous, it's because I am. I'm nervous about saying something wrong or forgetting to say something in all these notes that I don't have an opportunity to respond to after I sit down. I'm nervous that I'm going to offend you and that you might, that might unduly influence your decision. Please keep in mind that all statements made by me and by counsel of both sides at this stage of trial is argument, and that means it's not evidence in itself. You can't consider argument as evidence in this case. You're limited to considering the evidence from that witness stand and from up here on these papers and videos. I wish I could tell you what happens upon a verdict of what we call NGRI, or not guilty by reason of insanity. We wish we could tell you what happens. We can't. It's in the instructions. You're not authorized to consider that. I will tell you that there are 3 separate verdicts. There are 3 separate verdict forms for each count. There are 2 counts, that makes 6. So there are 6 separate verdict forms, 3 on each case. And not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity are 2 separate and distinct verdicts. I promised you in opening statements that we would do the best we could to give you the tools to evaluate witness statements, to evaluate the confession, which we did end up seeing on that video, to evaluate talk about the confession, to evaluate his behaviors. I believe that we gave you those tools, and I believe that, especially when viewing the video, that you utilized those tools and looked at each statement and saw how it fit into the bigger picture, saw how it fit into all the statements. You saw Dr. Price tell you that schizophrenic breaks usually occur in the late teens and early 20s. That's Mr. Lott in 2016. You saw on that video the tangential thought process that Dr. Falls described. You saw Kody open up with his delusions when he realized he had, as Dr. Price put, a sympathetic ear. And how could you not see on that video that those crazy delusions were not sincerely held? And that they obscured his reality. They obscured his knowing right from wrong. Another reason for showing lack of remorse, besides not having a conscience, is not knowing what you did is wrong. But you saw further Kody's broken and confused thoughts. You saw his mood symptoms, as described by Dr. Price, and you saw even suicidal ideation. You saw on that video, the same as all of us in this courtroom, the strange actions and behaviors of a person who's mentally ill. And both doctors noted that even after the confession, Kody was still exhibiting the same symptoms of schizoaffective disorder. Of course, Kody was more rational after medication and treatment when he talked to Dr. Price than he was when he was not on medication when he talked to Dr. Falls, because he's being treated for a severe mental illness that impairs his ability to be rational. You heard Dr. Falls, who did talk to family members and spoke with Kody without any antipsychotics, and then with them, who meticulously, over a very long period of time, laid out each seemingly rational reason and each irrational or delusional reason, or I should say thought, that was going through Kody's head when this shooting was committed. You heard Dr. Falls testify that it's his opinion that this would have happened with or without drugs, and that Kody exhibited those delusions without drugs both before and after the shooting, the tragic death of Miss Landavazo. Kody, in many statements, has given many reasons and many thoughts for what he did. Many of those conflict with themselves, they conflict with each other, and that's because he's severely mentally ill. It was a mess of thoughts up there, a mess of motivations. And the fact that Kody has a severe mental illness is not disputed in this case. And voluntary intoxication is not a defense. But if you believe that Kody had a severe mental illness caused by real damage to his brain by repeated drug use, that can be a type of mental disease or defect contemplated by the insanity defense. In Kody's mess of thoughts, both rational and delusional, many were crazy. He stated he believed, in the interview, he stated he believed that doctors prescribed drugs, referring to antipsychotics, rot his brain. He killed Miss Landavazo, but he didn't want her to suffer. He talked about his birthday repeatedly and about the colors. He talked about fate and about superimposing numbers and how that was really meaningful to him. He talked about a cult in Houston. He talked about changing. He talked about seeing people change into animals when he wasn't on drugs. He mentioned how he was born because of a fortune teller who consulted with his dad. There are a lot of thoughts that are crazy. Some specific thoughts, though, that I'm going to point you to undermine, or as Dr. Falls put it, invalidate his knowledge of wrongfulness, which is really the issue here. After Detective Killingsworth got him to open up, that you saw on the screen, he said, Kody says, "I saved her from the evil of this world." He says, that this is the way God works. He uses the devil to call his children home because that's the only way you can go through a righteous death. She's in a better place, and that's all that matters. So I thought I was going to go ahead and save her from the evils of this world, you know. those bits I picked out of the statement that he made to detectives, to the detectives, including Detective Killingsworth. Those need to be taken in the context of his entire statement. But the reason I don't want you to forget, the reason I picked those out is I don't want you to forget about them. Because I expect the state will get up here, just like Dr. Falls did, and talk about all these rational other reasons he also had in his head when this was going on. But as Dr. Falls testified, if even one delusional, sincerely held delusional belief caused by a severe mental disease or defect undermined or interfered with his knowledge of wrongfulness, then it's Dr. Falls' opinion that he was insane at the time of the offense. Dr. Price did not share that opinion, as you heard. Ultimately, you are the only people in this room, not the judge, not I, nor the state's attorneys, nor anyone in the gallery, can make the decision of sanity. You're the only people who can do that. I trust you to do that. You are the only people who can determine the credibility of the evidence and of the witnesses. Attorneys say, and it holds true, that jurors shouldn't leave their common sense at the door. I think that was mentioned in jury selection, if you remember. Don't leave your common sense at the door. You can use your common sense. It's another way of saying you can make rational inferences from this evidence. You don't need to be an expert on insanity when you watch that video to see how insane Kody is. How insane he was in September. Even Detective Killingsworth said, quote, "From my experience, whoever did this probably needs some help. Now what happened to those girls is terrible. But whoever did this definitely needs some serious psychological help." You heard Detective Killingsworth testify that that was a technique he used. But it rings true to us. It rings true in this courtroom because it is common sense. I'll put it this way. In jury selection, Mr. Poole stood up here and described two criminal scenarios. One of those scenarios, a man robs a football official on the 50-yard line during, he might have said Super Bowl, or he might have said a busy game. I don't remember. But in the middle of the day, robs a man on the 50-yard line of a busy football game. And he said that might be insane on its face. Do you think that guy who robbed that official wouldn't run away? Here, we have a man in the middle of the day with lots of witnesses who kills a total stranger without anything real to gain. He had nothing real to gain, only delusions. Dr. Price testified, Kody thought this would magically solve all his problems. The only way that makes any sense is if Kody's seriously mentally ill. And in this case, you've seen evidence that Kody was insane. All right, so I want to lay out the chronology or series of events in a little more detail. And I'm going to start with before this incident, a year before, Kody was diagnosed with this disorder that was present in September of 2016. This was during he was discharged with that diagnosis after a period of sobriety. In other words, after he was sober and the drugs were not in his system. Then after release from this facility, he hides his mental illness from his family. As you heard Dr. Price testify, people often try to disguise their delusional beliefs or hallucinations. He hid that from his family. He hid it from his mother, who he's trying to protect. He self-medicates and ends up in a cycle of opioid tolerance and withdrawal. Then he shoots Miss Smith and Miss Landavazo during the middle of a clear day with witnesses, as I talked about earlier. When he's pulled over 48 hours later, he immediately consents to the search of his car before even being asked to consent. He just says, "You want to search my car?" This was the same car he used in the shooting 48 hours before. When he's in the back of the patrol car, you saw the enhanced video, he looks up. I would like you to go back and relook at that video, because it doesn't look like he's praying. It looks like he's talking to Jesus. And in a case like this, there might be a distinction there that we ought to take seriously. And talking to Jesus fits in with his delusions about the war between good and evil, and trying to get God involved. Those delusions, which he told Detective Killingsworth 48 hours after the murder. Then a year later, he talks to doctors. A year later, he talked to one doctor, and then 2 years later, he talks to another doctor, both of which he reiterated his delusional beliefs, and he still presented symptoms of schizoaffective disorder. It's undisputed that Kody has a habitual drug use problem where he developed tolerance to the drugs. Again, using common sense, why would a person with delusions, hallucinations that they know other people don't see or believe use opiates? Why would someone do that? I encourage you to use your common sense on that. Dr. Falls testified he was trying to maintain a baseline. He was trying to maintain, he had so much tolerance. He described it as being high, but in reality, he was just trying to stay as normal as he could and avoid those withdrawal symptoms we saw right there in that video. The state wants you to totally believe in Kody's self-reported drug use, but they want to gloss over all of the delusional thoughts he had that led to him not knowing the wrongfulness of his conduct. That's all self-reported as well. And keep in mind, the government did have an opportunity to drug test Kody within 48 hours, but there's no evidence they did. So I want to talk to you about that sympathy instruction that Mr. Rasmussen mentioned earlier. It's okay, it's entirely okay to acknowledge the emotion in this room. That's okay. It's okay for you to feel for the witnesses. It's okay for you to feel for these girls in this case. It's totally okay for you to be aware of the emotion in the gallery here and here over the last week and a half. What that instruction asks you to do is to not let your own sympathy, those feelings, to not let those interfere with your deliberations, to not let those affect your verdict. Your job is to objectively evaluate the evidence in the context of the entirety of the evidence. You have to strive to be like Dr. Ogden. Remember how she sat up there and she was professional. And she said, it takes a special type of person to do what she does. Well, you are all special people selected from a big jury panel, and you are on this jury because we believe you can do your job. We believe that you can set aside your sympathy, set aside your prejudice, set aside your resentment, and evaluate whether or not we met our burden to show that Kody, due to a severe mental disease or defect, did not understand the wrongfulness of his conduct. Okay, I'm going to talk about verdict options. As I mentioned, there were 6 verdict 6 verdict forms. The 6 verdict forms are 3 for Makayla Smith and 3 for Lauren Landavazo. You can, if you believe that Kody was sane for legal purposes for a verdict of for Makayla Smith with an aggravated assault, if you believe that he was sane for that shooting and that his delusions did not interfere with what he did in that case, you can find that case as a guilty verdict if that's what you so believe. But if you further believe that we met our burden to show he was insane for the shooting of Lauren Landavazo, you as a jury are empowered and authorized to find that he was insane in the murder case. That is entirely your choice. And again, you're the only people in this room who could make that decision. After I sit down, it's going to be, it always is, extremely difficult for me to sit there and not be able to respond to anything the state says. That's the reason I keep looking at my notes. I know that it's not as smooth, it's not as slick as not having my notes here with me. But I don't want to forget anything. I want to show you everything in this case. I want you to know as much as you can so you can make the right decision. After you examine the evidence, I'm going to ask you to find a return a verdict of NGRI or not guilty by reason of consent. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what I want to do with you first is go over the charge so that when you go in there, you read the charge and you kind of know how to work around it. The first thing is, you've heard the defense on page 3, page 4, I think it is. Talk about bias and prejudice and sympathy. They want you to take emotion out of this cold case is what they want to do. But ladies and gentlemen, you are absolutely allowed to take into account the emotion, the demeanor of every single one of those witnesses. Makayla, she let her soul out to you all. She let it out and it flowed. You are absolutely, and I beg you to take that into account when you determine whether this defendant was insane at the time of the offense or not. Sarah and Jamie, they were broken about what they saw. They were emotional about what they saw. Take that into account. You're absolutely well within your rights. That's not what that means. That's all part of the case. It's all part of evidence. So certainly take into account the emotion, the stress, the anxiety, the memories, the nightmares that they'll have for the rest of their lives.
I object to that sort of statement on the wall. They're only allowed to consider bias, sympathy, or prejudice from the witness stand in the context of determining whether or not that person is lying or telling the truth.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you. On page 3, it talks about voluntary intoxication, and that it does not constitute a defense to the commission of a crime. And we know that the defendant was, by both experts and by the defendant's own admission, that he was high, that he felt good, that he was pissed about his life and the way his life was going. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he had no right to take it out on 2 little girls, 13-year-olds, walking home from school, complete strangers, laughing and joking about what little 13-year-old girls do. Never expecting that this murderer was lurking and watching from afar, locked and loaded, ready to go. They had no defense. Lauren Landavazo used her binder, what she could. Look at the injuries, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the injuries. Her right arm is shredded. Her fingers of her left hand are shredded. It's because that's all she had to protect herself. It went through that binder. It went through that book. Then on page 4, it instructs you that defendants are presumed to be sane and that the state carries no burden to prove sanity. We've talked about it. We've talked about it with experts. That's not in dispute. Once we prove that murder, as I submit to you, Mr. Rasmussen conceded, we have proven our murder and that Mr. Poole talked to you about so eloquently and so passionately about, the dispute's not whether the murder occurred or not. So once we prove the murder, the burden shifts to the defense. And then they have to prove that he was insane, the defendant was insane at the time of the offense. At the time of the offense. Not a year before when he was at UT Harris Hospital. Not a year after when he's talking to his expert. It was at the time of the offense. And they have a pretty high burden of proof. They have to prove that he didn't know that his actions were wrong. That he had a mental illness and he didn't appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. And then at the back, you're going to have the verdict forms that everybody's talking about, and then you're going to have count 1, which is the murder. And the first one is if you believe the defendant committed the offense of murder. And I submit to you that's the verdict form that you're going to use. And you just have your presiding foreperson sign that. Behind it, I want to make sure you understand the next one. That's where you out and out find the defendant not guilty of the offense. He walks out of his courtroom if you sign the second verdict form. The third verdict form is not guilty by reason of insanity. And that's as to count 1. And then on the back of that, you're going to find the deadly weapon verdict. That's just whether a firearm was used. A firearm is per se a deadly weapon. So I submit to you there's no argument whether a deadly weapon was used. You heard from a Kendrick say that it was a firearm, it's a deadly weapon, but we have to have you make a finding as to that. And then you're going to go on, and that's the count dealing with Lauren Landavazo. Count 2 is the count regarding Makayla Smith. It's aggravated assault. You go through the same process. The first one is if you find the defendant guilty, which is what the state is requesting, you just find the defendant guilty of aggravated assault. You have the foreperson sign that document. The next one is also a not guilty, just flat out not guilty. He walks out of the courtroom today. And I submit to you that the defense has conceded that should not be the case. And then the third one is not guilty by reason of insanity for the aggravated assault. And finally, the last verdict form is another deadly weapon finding. And there's no contest on that if you just find that a deadly weapon was used. And that pretty much sums up the charge. Drug misuse is not a disease, it's a decision. And that's what we're talking about here today and what the last 2 weeks have been about. They've been about choices and decisions on the part of this defendant. It's like the decision to step out in front of a moving car. Would you call that not a disease? You'd call it an error in judgment. That's what he does, and he did, and will continue to do with regard to drugs. He told Dr. Price that if he gets out of jail, if he gets out of prison, what's the first thing he's going to do? He's going back to the drugs. Those are conscious decisions on his part. He's been without them for 2 years, but yet he craves them. He wants them, and that's what he'll do, and that's what he was doing on the day that he committed murder and aggravated assault of those two 13-year-olds. Let's talk about before. Right before September 2nd of 2016, before he murdered and shot two 13-year-olds, he formed a plan. You know right from wrong when you're forming a plan ahead of time. He watched the victim, Lauren Landavazo, for a year. She was in 7th grade at that time. She would walk home with her boyfriend who was 8th grade at that time. From junior high. In his statement, he acknowledges he knows she's walking home from middle school. Despite what he told the experts, he couldn't bring himself to say, yeah, I knew she was 13 years old. I knew she was that young. He wants to say 16 because it sounds better. There he goes with his lying and manipulation where he tells you in that statement he's good at it. Waited until his parents were out of town to get the loaded semi-automatic rifle from their apartment. He waited. He had a key to their apartment. He knew they were going to Ruidoso. No chance of coming back to that apartment. this is the really sick and insidious part, is he chose the specific caliber of rifle to use. The .22 doesn't cause as much damage as a .223. The .223 would have mutilated her. He didn't want that. Preparation. What did he do? He left his parents a note for when he was caught and arrested. That's in preparation, ladies and gentlemen. He knows what he's about to do. He knows what he's doing is wrong. So he gets ready to tell his mom, who he's so close to, who gives him the drug money, why he did what he did. That's preparation. That's knowing right from wrong right there. He placed the rifle in a bag, threw clothes over the rifle to make it appear as it was a baseball bat. So people would think that he's going to baseball practice. Who does that? That's thinking beforehand. That's not an irrational thought. That's, okay, what are people going to think if they see me when I leave this apartment with this thing sticking out? He's not carrying the rifle out of the apartment, and walking along. Everybody's going to report it if they see that. And I'm telling you all of these things, and I've listed them because you can't take it back into the jury room. So that's why this is probably the third time that I've mentioned this series of actions on the part of the defendant, so you can talk amongst yourselves about the wrongfulness of his actions and his knowledge. He racked the weapon, or because the expert didn't know, it's basically where you're cocking the gun, for another lack of a better term. So he racks the weapon before he leaves the apartment, so he's ready to commit murder. He wants to do it fast so he can get away. He does that so there's no mistakes. He's ready to go. Locked and loaded, ready to be a sophisticated assassin. How many times did he say he was a sophisticated assassin? What do assassins do? They kill people. That's against the law. You can't kill people. He knew his conduct was wrong. He put there should be a safety. I apologize for my quick typing here, but put the weapon on safety so as not to hurt himself. There was nobody else in the apartment. Heck, he didn't want to hurt himself. He knew that gun went off and he might hurt himself, so got to put it on safety. How much forethought does that take when you're getting the weapon ready? Heck, I probably wouldn't even know to put it on safety, and I've been around guns all my life. He watched from inside the apartment. It's not like he was sitting outside with a rifle just waiting for them to walk by and he can unleash on them. He was inside the apartment waiting for school to get let out, like he'd watched her so many times before. Watches her and her friends walk by. When they walk by and he's enraged because of the color of the skin of her friends that she's walking with, he runs outside, he places the bag and the weapon carefully in the vehicle. He describes that in his statement that you heard yesterday, so that the butt of the gun is up. So all he has to do is reach over and point it out the window, and he's ready to go, because it's speed at which he wants to commit this offense. Why? Because he doesn't want to get caught. Then you have during. He used a vehicle. It's mobile. You can get away. If you shoot somebody just on the street and you're walking there, you can run, but there are going to be people that are chasing right behind you trying to catch you because you know what you did is wrong. People are going to catch you because they know what you did is wrong. So he uses a vehicle. Remember what he said? Oh, I used I was hoping, it's Friday night, and so it's football in Texas, and so there's pep rallies, there's a lot of stuff going on, so it's that confusion he was hoping to cause so that he'd get away with it. He stopped at the end of the alleyway, so there's nowhere for the victim to run. She was his prey, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't want her to get away. She was at that edge. He pulls up. She has nowhere to go. She wasn't going to get away from him, no matter how fast she ran, no matter how fast she tried. He remembers every detail, even though, and this is the really sick, insidious part. I keep saying that, I can't get past it because it's evil. Every detail he remembered, he savored, even though the shooting only lasted a matter of seconds. Think about it. If I shot someone, heck, I couldn't tell you who was beside one person or another. He can tell you there were 3 girls. One 13-year-old girl runs down the alley immediately. One stands her ground by her friend. And the other one's there, the one that he wants, and he shoots her. And I don't know whether Makayla got the first shot. I don't know if Lauren did. All I know is they both got shot. And they should never have gotten shot. They were 2 13-year-olds. So in his statement, he claims he shoots Lauren first. And then he sees Makayla not leaving her friend's side. So remember, he goes, pop, 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 and then he puts a couple in her friend, pop, pop, and then he goes back to pop, 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 pop. I mean, did you see how giddy he was? He was reliving that, ladies and gentlemen. You'd think that it'd be a nightmare for him. Those are his few seconds. So he shoots Lauren, he shoots Makayla, and what I dreaded for 2 years I had to do yesterday, that was introduce that statement, because the Landavazos had to hear how their daughter died. They had to hear that she didn't die instantly, because they've lived off of that for the past 2 years, that she died quickly. So he hears Lauren scream, and he goes back to Lauren and knows that I got to stop the screaming because he doesn't like that. It's not that Lauren was in pain. Remember, did you see him in his video? He didn't like it. He didn't like the way it made him feel. So he had to quit it. So he aimed for her head, and remember, he even said he saw the tuft of her hair. It's corroborated by the evidence, by the pathologist. That was the kill shot. And he knew she was dead, and she went down. He remembers those seconds. It couldn't have been more than 8 seconds. And he remembers every detail. I submit to you, it's video games. Because in those video games that you play constantly, you're always looking for these other enemies coming out from different directions. So he had the peripheral vision that normal people don't. And I could talk about aim at the body and not the head initially because he didn't want to mutilate her. Notice that her black friend wouldn't leave the victim's side, so he shot her so she'd run off. Notice the race of all 3 girls. And this is a matter of seconds. He emptied the clip until it clicked. Remember, he made the clicking sound in his statement to detectives. And thank God those detectives were persistent. Thank God Detective Alan Killingsworth persisted, because for 45 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, he denied it and he came up with every excuse in the world. He did. If only he had a few more bullets, he would have killed Makayla Smith. Why? Because she was a witness. What do you care about witnesses if you don't know what you're doing is wrong? And then after. And this is really telling. Flight. He left the scene immediately onto one of the busiest roads in our town, in Wichita Falls. Southwest Parkway, you've heard the testimony, is one of our busiest streets. It's when schools are letting out. Not only a junior high, but a high school, elementary schools, all throughout our town, they're letting out. There are pep rallies going on because it's Football Friday. Parents are picking up their children. Children are walking home. No one is thinking anybody's going to get shot in this town. He tells you he hoped there would be confusion. Why would you hope there's confusion unless you knew what you were doing was wrong? If you thought you were going to be right there and get caught in broad daylight, as the defense wants you to think. He took the back roads. Who takes the back roads if you don't know what you're doing is wrong? Went to a small town at least an hour away. This is key, ladies and gentlemen. He had to distance himself from the murder weapon. He threw it into a vacant field with long grass without stopping. He looked back to make sure he couldn't see the weapon. You know what you're doing is wrong if you toss it. He didn't even stop. He didn't even stop his vehicle. Remember, he said he threw it out and was getting the heck out of there, and then he lit up a joint. You just killed, and you know you've killed the 13-year-old, and you know you've shot another one, you don't know whether she's dead or not, and you light up a freaking joint? Is that mental illness? No. That's, I've just done what I wanted to do, and I vented. Remember, he said, I finally got to vent because he's mad at women. His job was completed. And so now he's just going to stroll on to own it. And the defense makes a big deal of, oh, well, he didn't wipe the weapon down, there's some grass left on it. Remember, he was putting it back into his parents' safe. He'd been convinced that he wasn't going to get caught. So what does he care? If you don't know what you're doing is wrong, why do you have a scanner app? Why do you have it in your vehicle after you've just committed murder and aggravated assault, shooting two 13-year-olds? A scanner app. I don't even have one on my phone. And he's listening to the police, listening to the chatter. And you'll see in the FBI report, he acts like he doesn't know the details of the shooting when his mother, who's in Ruidoso, texts him a few hours later about the shooting, because she knows her son's capable of that. Why else would you text your son about some shooting in Wichita Falls when you're on vacation in Ruidoso? She knew what he was capable of. She enabled him. She gave him money for his drugs. He checked social media, and it's in the record. The defense expert didn't bother to look at his cell phone, which is pretty telling, before, during, and after the offense. It shows you, he's not in there talking about the devil. He's not in there talking about delusions. He's texting people, calling people, talking to his mother. I urge you to look at those. He's checking social media and the news media. Text homepage is what he mentions in his statement. And I'm sure he was watching Channel 6-2, which is our other station, and Times Record News, our local newspaper. Anyway, he's checking it constantly for the details of the shooting that whole weekend, from that Friday through that Sunday before he gets caught. He knows what he's doing is wrong. And talk about evil, he looks on Facebook after he's killed this little girl. He looks on Facebook to look at her Facebook profile to find out her name and her boyfriend's name. He looks at his profile. He wants to know her boyfriend's name, that punk. Realized the police were looking at the wrong suspect vehicle, so he came back to town. He was giddy. Remember, it was kind of like a blessing when the black truck all of a sudden came up. Man, I thought I was free and clear. So he could go and do whatever he wanted to. He could actually even come back to town. When he comes back to town, what does he do? He's not going to get caught. People are looking for this black truck. There's chaos going on. Man, I'm a stranger. They don't know who I am. I'm the only one that knows that I shot them. He goes and destroys that note because he doesn't want his parents to find out what he's done. Doesn't want his mom to find out what he's done. Let's go back to our normal, regular life and my drug using. This is how determined he was. He returns for that weapon not once but twice. Remember, he throws it out in that vacant field. He doesn't know. He saw it generally where it goes. So he goes back that morning. He says he didn't try that hard. So he goes back later when it's cooler and goes and searches for that weapon, the murder weapon, until he finds it. Remember, he's hot and he's sweaty, but he's determined to find it, and then he sees the black butt of the gun. So he tosses it because he wants to distance himself from it, because he doesn't want to be caught with it, because he knows that he's wrong. And then he goes back and gets it when he realizes he's not caught, because he doesn't want to get caught. So he's going to try to put it back in his parents' apartment before they come home. He didn't want them to know. He thought they might turn him. I submit to you they probably wouldn't have. He takes the weapon out of the vehicle, wraps it in a blanket. He doesn't know right from wrong, right? And then he places it under his arm. Do you remember how she said that he was walking like this? Do you remember, to conceal it? And he's looking around, and he's in a hurried fashion, Who does that but a guilty man? And thank God for her. You know, you see something, you say something. And she and her husband, you heard, debated it for a while whether she should call because she didn't want to get anybody in trouble. Had it been 20 seconds earlier or 20 seconds later, we might not be here right now in the presence of a murderer. He may never have been caught. Thank God for that woman. She's a hero. After leaving the apartment, you heard the 911 call, you heard the I mean, my goodness, and there's a picture right here where she, of all pens to grab, she grabs a purple ink pen and writes the tag number on her hand. Ladies and gentlemen, who does that? I couldn't have remembered probably 3 of the digits, and she had all 6. And then went to Google and to see what type of vehicle it was to help the police as much as she could. And let's not forget, when she first saw the defendant, what was he passing? The memorial. And what does a murderer always do? Returns to the scene of the crime. So after leaving the apartment, he's pulled over by an officer, and he's clenching the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles are white. It's because you know you've done something wrong, and you're caught. During the traffic stop, which you heard, he followed every direction and every question that the officer had. Did he say, oh my gosh, I'm hallucinating, the devil, anything like that? Did you hear any of that? He sounded like a normal person. He wasn't suffering delusions. This is less than 48 hours after the murder and aggravated assault. Officer Gordon did a great job. And Officer Robeson, to stop him, to have the wherewithal to think about reasonable suspicion, that's not easy, ladies and gentlemen. That's not easy. Because he didn't commit a traffic stop. So he had to articulate reasonable suspicion. And I submit to you, he prayed to Jesus. What's the first thing that you do when you get into trouble or you're on hard times? I know what I do. You pray. You pray to God, you pray to Jesus to help you. To help you out of this mess, out of this problem, out of this mistake, whatever you've done, you pray to Jesus. And that supposed satanic, delusional person over there, first thing he did was pray to Jesus. Not the devil, not the occult, not 6 + 9 = 8, not red plus blue equals purple. He prayed to Jesus. He lied to officers for 45 minutes without once mentioning a single delusion or a single reference to the devil. You heard it. And the amazing thing to me is that if it had been me, and I had an officer that said, yeah, you know, we found did you go, were you carrying anything? Yeah, I was carrying a comforter. Oh, were you carrying anything else? Did you notice how he put his hands? Because he knew he was kind of sticking it under his elbow, trying to make it make sense, right? But when he was busted about not washing the comforter, he said, oh, I had to take the drugs and go. We take the money and go. I just want to get out of there. So he even was quick about his lies. And then the biggest lie in the whole thing was when the officer mentions the stent shell casing that they found in the vehicle. What does he say? Oh yeah, that's when I went a year ago with my buddy, and we were out in the country and we were shooting coyotes from, and that guy's name's Eric, shooting coyotes out in the country. And then, well, did you shoot it? Well, now that I think about it, no, I wasn't shooting, it was him. Oh, really? Well, what type of weapon was it? A .22. How fast was that? Watch it. It's unbelievable. I couldn't have done it. And that would be me trying to think of a lie. It's so natural to him because he's a manipulator. He's a liar. He's an exaggerator. Everything Dr. Price told you is true. And that's before Dr. Price ever got to interview the defendant. Evil. evil, ladies and gentlemen. He implicated not one innocent person, but two. He implicated his stepbrother to try to throw the detectives off the scent. Oh, well, you know, my stepbrother has long, shaggy, brown hair. You know, oh, he could have had keys to my stepdad's black truck. Oh, he was supposed to come and get a gun, is what my mom told me. Knowing that he had committed the offense. He's trying to throw even his own stepbrother under the bus. And then when that wasn't enough, later on, oh, yeah. There's this guy named Morlon, whatever. He dates my ex-girlfriend. He's been following me around. Oh, he drives a black truck with chrome, this and that, and tries to make it match the suspect vehicle to throw the detectives off. Knowing Morlon did not commit the offense, he did. He's evil. He told the detectives that you know you've done something bad when you're talking to the police. He knows his actions are wrong. He uses the term over and over again, caught. You don't use the term caught unless you know what you're doing is wrong. You don't use the term murder or the murder unless you know it's an offense. If it's an offense, it's illegal, you know what you did is wrong. Told the police he found himself playing it cool when he hadn't been caught. The word caught again. He even brought up the reward money amounts to officers. He knew it because he'd been checking that Facebook, he'd been checking that news constantly that whole weekend. And do you remember the defense expert? He wanted to argue with me about what constantly meant. Oh, he might have had to go to the bathroom. I mean, he was making excuses for the defendant, much like the defendant's mother. Excuses. Bought and paid for. Told officer he knew within the first 48 hours that that's crucial in a murder case. And he tells them, I almost made it. I almost made it 48 hours. Told the officer he was going to keep the murder a secret if he'd been caught. If he hadn't been caught. His little secret, no one knew, only him. And then he said to officers that people wouldn't even know they were in the presence of a killer. He was proud of that. Of a 13-year-old and hurting and shooting another 13-year-old. During the jail telephone call, he tells his mother and stepfather not once but twice, you heard it, that he did it. Remember his stepfather said, did you confess to it or did you do it? And he even makes the distinction, no, I did it. He asked him again, same question. He said, no, I did it. Have a good life, his mother says. During the jail telephone call, he and his mother, you heard this from Dr. Price, he and his mother discussed pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. Just 2 weeks after he's arrested, he's already plotting and planning what he's going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. 2 weeks after he murders a 13-year-old and shoots another one in the chest whose bullet is still there. He's telling you he's going to plead insanity. And what did he do? 2 years later, that's exactly what his defense team charged him to. Let's talk about the experts. And I'm almost done. Experts, we have Dr. Falls. Impressive where he went to medical school. Seems like a nice enough gentleman. He has zero experience. Zero. This is his first trial testimony regarding insanity. I submit to you they couldn't find an experienced forensic psychologist or psychiatrist to find that that defendant was insane.
Objection, Your Honor, that's a mistake of the evidence.
Overruled.
Again, I submit to you they couldn't find anybody with the credentials and the experience and the ability to testify that would say Kody Lott was insane at the time of the offense. And remember when I asked him, are you a defense witness? He said yes. And that was kind of interesting. I'd never had an expert say that before. I was just seeing what he'd say. He was a defense witness. He testified for the defense. He gave excuses for the defense and the defendant, excuses, ladies and gentlemen. He's supposed to give an unbiased opinion based upon medical certainty. And you saw it, and he couldn't even answer one of my questions without wanting to explain everything. And I was just yes or no, and he couldn't even give me yes or no. That's all I asked. No experience. In charging $15,000 before you even took the stand? $15,000 for what you heard. And that's not considering the 2 days that he was here. Versus Dr. Price. Dr. Price has been doing this for 35 years. You all heard that. You heard what type of cases he testified in. He was fair to the defense, as fair as he was to the state. I retained him. I didn't tell him what opinion he should have. Had he told me that the defendant was insane at the time of the offense, I'd have to tell the defense. It was purely medical. He told you I didn't try to influence him. I was stuck with whatever he came up with. I was that confident in this case after looking at the facts of this case, that somebody with that experience of Dr. Price would see what I saw. And I'm just an untrained eye, that Dr. Paul said, to the untrained eye, you wouldn't know these things. And Dr. Price has been on some big cases. You heard him talk about Eddie Ralph, and that was the Christopher Kyle case, an American sniper. He testified in that case. They could have picked any expert in the United States that they wanted to. And they thought that Dr. Randall Price was fair, experienced, honest, and professional, and that's why he testified in that case. And we brought him here so that you could hear his unbiased opinion. This is the most telling of it all. This is what it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen. In 35 years as a forensic psychologist, Dr. Randall Price has never seen a single case with more behavioral indicators that the defendant knew that his actions were wrong. 35 years. That man he told you about all the people that he's evaluated. He told you about all his opinions for the defense, for the state, for the judge. And this is what he comes up with. In all those years, the defendant right over here had more behavioral indicators that he knew that his actions were wrong. More so than anybody else. In the history of Dr. Price's professional forensic psychology in his history. And that would be Kody Lott, the man that sits before you. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess it's been over a week now. I stood before you. I told you what I was going to bring you. A little emotional back then, and I think you now see why I was emotional on that very first day in my opening statement. We've lived and breathed this case for 2 years. The Smiths, the Landavazos, good people. I told you that Lauren's parents, Vern and Bianca, and the Makayla Smith's parents, Rodney and Shamika Smith, those are the parents of the two 13-year-old girls that day. They've had the patience with me. It's been 2 years. And I've done everything that I could do. You have the detectives. You have the witnesses that were out on scene. They come and they took the stand and they did everything that they could do to bring you the truth. Everything. As hard as it was, you heard them crying and you heard the emotion. You heard Makayla take that stand when she didn't have to, but she wanted to. She wanted to be strong for her friend. She wanted to do right by her friend. And I submit to you that she did. You heard the detectives, Detective Alan Killingsworth, and there was Charles Casillas, and there was Walt Vermillion. And Walt Vermillion, this whole case, he put together. He did a brilliant job in this case. This is not an easy case. You saw how much evidence there is in this case. and he managed to keep it organized. He worked hard, he worked nights, he worked nonstop. The patrol officers that were out on scene that pulled the car over, they tried to do their job. It's a joint team effort on the part of everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I try to do my job. Ron Poole tried to do his job, did a great job. It's an honor to try a case with Ron Poole. My investigators, my office, my support staff, we all cared about this case and we put our heart into it. And I told you that I was going to come before you and I was going to ask you one thing. Excuse me. That at the end of this case, on behalf, of the state of Texas, on behalf of the citizens of Wichita County that I represent, that I was going to ask you 12 jurors and 2 alternates to do your job with the authority that you're vested with. You took an oath to uphold the law, to do what's right. You Tarrant County citizens, Wichita County is counting on you. The state of Texas is counting on you to do the right thing because he did the wrong thing and he knew it. Thank you.